Robert Bruce, Scotland's hero king. Few names have echoed through the ages like his, and few landscapes have shaped history quite like Stirling. We'll be getting plenty of both in Outlaw King, a Netflix film that wants to do for Bruce what Braveheart did for Wallace, while hopefully not butchering the history like Mel Gibson did. It's got Chris Pine as Bruce, Aaron Taylor-Johnson as the Black Douglas, and several icons of the Scottish screen like James Lord Commander Cosmo and Tony Curran. Filming has taken place at historic sites across Scotland, including Craigmillar Castle in Edinburgh and Linlithgow Palace. With a likely release date of November this year, we thought we would take a look at Stirling, the land that, more than any other, forged Bruce's reputation not as an outlaw king, but as the stuff of legends.
Many of you will likely know Robert Bruce as the betrayer of William Wallace in Braveheart. And while that certainly makes for a good dramatic twist, it's a pretty egregious example of how Braveheart got some of the historical facts so wrong.
Robert Bruce was one of 13 claimants to the Scottish throne after King Alexander III took a little tumble off the cliff over in Fife and triggered a succession crisis. That ultimately led to the Wars of Independence, and in the early days of that struggle, there is no question Bruce was out for Bruce. However, there is no evidence whatsoever that he ever took to the battlefield for Edward I, and he's possibly the knight who knighted William Wallace after the Battle of Stirling Bridge. We can't say for sure. What we can say is that Bruce was no traitor. The spark that Wallace lit was turned into a raging fire by Bruce, who drove the English out of Scotland while sacrificing everything: lands, family, friends, and his own health in the process. In fact, you know the scene where Bruce personally orchestrates the betrayal of Wallace? That's so laughably inaccurate, it's a bit like saying George Washington didn't cross the Delaware, he got halfway across, turned around, joined the Redcoats, and crushed the American rebels. It's not just inaccurate, it's downright slanderous. Now that said, as a kid in Canada, it was probably watching Braveheart that inspired me to one day make the move to Scotland. So I've got a bit of a soft spot in my heart for it, but I thought I'd ask a genuine Scotsman what you think of Braveheart.
Do you know, I think it's a really solid film, I have to say. I loved the casting, I loved the book, it was a great story to read. And I remember when it came out in the cinema in the mid-90s, I was too young at the time to see it, I was heartbroken, but it was a big deal at the time. Everyone was talking about it, and it shone an enormous amount of spotlight on this region in particular. So overall, I have only good thoughts about it.
That's fair enough, but I've got to put my historian's cap on here for a moment and have a bit of a gripe with the inaccuracies. I could go on and on and on for hours, wearing blue face paint that was 1,000 years out of fashion, taking the bridge out of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, pretty egregious. So is there anything that gets under your skin about it?
Well, you've got to have a bit of romance and a bit of Hollywood license to go off the script a little bit. Obviously the story with the princess and all of that over-romanticised things and kind of brought an Outlander element to the story, but it fit. And although the one thing I would say is Robert the Bruce didn't come out of it that way, which was a shame. But overall, the storyline was roughly correct in terms of William Wallace's humble beginnings, his start in life in Lanark, the murder of his wife by the local magistrate that led to him gathering the clans, gathering momentum, going to Stirling Bridge and winning against all the odds, then invading Northern England, the audacity, before ultimately being defeated at Falkirk, and then, of course, the gory execution of William in London.
Alright, I'll take that. Most importantly though, what do you think of Mel Gibson's accent?
Well, the less said about that the better, eh?
But anyway, we could break down Braveheart all day. Let's get back to Stirling. So its historically pivotal geographic placement aside, I've always really liked Stirling as a day-out city. The city centre itself in the new town is very much focused on shopping, where the old town retains an incredible atmosphere and a presence. If you cast the net even wider to around the city, add up all those historical attractions, it just completes the set.
Historically, the land around Stirling is the deadliest ally that any commander could hope for. Until the 19th century, there was a huge swathe of boggy ground to the west of the castle, not to mention high hills. To the east, more boggy ground and the River Forth. That makes a pinch point in the land. You can hold off thousands with only a few hundred if you make your stand at Stirling. Stirling's importance was no secret. You can see that on this 13th century map of Britain made by the English monk Matthew Paris, where Stirling Bridge is literally the only crossing point from south to north or vice versa. Now, even back in the 13th century, they knew that there were in fact other ways around, but if you're bringing a large army, Stirling really is the only option. So, when it came time for Bruce to make his iconic stand against the odds of Bannockburn, he knew just where to dig in. In 1313, the Scots were laying siege to Stirling Castle, one of only 3 castles in the kingdom left in English hands. Sieges were actually really boring. They were long, protracted affairs, and the Scots weren't terribly well suited to them, preferring hit-and-run tactics and lacking siege equipment like trebuchets of the sort that the English had in spades. So, the Scots, under Edward Bruce, Robert's brother, struck a deal. If the English could send a relieving army to Stirling Castle by Midsummer's Day, 1314, the Scots would leave it well enough alone. If they failed to do that, the castle would go over to the Scots without a fight. This made battle inevitable, so Bruce got to work. The Battle of Bannockburn made David versus Goliath seem like a safe bet. Robert Bruce had only 7,000 men. Little armour amongst them, and only those 15-foot tall spears to defend themselves with. Edward II brought an army at least 20,000 strong. That included at least 3,000 heavy cavalry, the tanks of their day, and at least 5,000 archers who could loose upwards of 10 arrows a minute. Think of them as a combination of machine gunners and snipers. What the hell do you do against that? You form a schiltrum. Now think of a schiltrum like a giant hedgehog of death. It is a steamroller of spear points with spears 15 foot long. That means from where you are, I could kill you. Now Robert Bruce trained his men in the use of a schiltrum meticulously. If you weren't trained, you were not joining the front line. Didn't matter how famous a warrior you were, get to the back. So here is how a schiltrum worked. The front rank would be crouched, supporting the spear with their foot up at a 45-degree angle. That's going to turn the enemy horse into a shish kebab. The second line, immediately behind the first guy, holding their spear straight ahead. Ha! Nice deadly thrust. The third guy back, this is where you need some serious strength, is holding his spear above his head to come in at you from above. So you've got 1, 2, 3, and even further back, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers of spear points. That means by the time an English knight could make contact with one man in the front of the Scottish army, that knight would have been hit by 11 of these schiltrum spears. In fact, if you want to see one of the best examples of a schiltrum in action, check out the Battle of the Bastards from Game of Thrones Season 6. That moment where you realise the wildlings can't even get within swinging distance of the Bolton spearmen, that's how Edward II would have felt watching his army get crushed at Bannockburn.
And perhaps the thing that I like best about Robert the Bruce is the fact that the man was a soldier's soldier. He wasn't just a king in the making. He was a man that put his life on the line. He took the same risks that his men did. And in the final run-up to the Battle of Bannockburn, he decided in a moment of madness or bravery to take on Henry de Bohun. And one of these English knights with everything you can imagine, resplendent in his armour, Robert the Bruce with his minimalistic gear decided, I'm going to show you a proper welcome to Scotland. He took his axe and drove it straight through de Bohun's head. Madness, utter madness, but it sent a huge message to the English and to his own men that this was a king in every sense of the word.
De Bohun may lie dead on the battlefield, but Bannockburn was no short affair. It was fought over 2 days. By the end of the first day, the English found themselves encamped in a boggy morass known as the Carse, stuck between 2 rivers, the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn, where the battle got its name. They were heavily demoralised and not up for a fight when, on the second day, the Scots charged downhill in a giant schiltrum and with those great spears simply pushed until there was nothing left to push against. By the end of that second day of battle, the 24th of June 1314, it was said that the Bannockburn was so full of English dead that you could cross it without getting your feet wet.
And the Battle of Bannockburn was not the only great military conflict that happened in and around Stirling. Because of the flat lands that surround the city, this place was absolutely built for a good scrap. And we couldn't come to Stirling without talking about Sir William Wallace, the Guardian of Scotland, and his incredible role in the Battle for Stirling Bridge, which he fought alongside Andrew de Murray in 1297 and recorded an incredible victory that will forever go down in Scottish history. There can be no doubt that the National Wallace Monument is one of Stirling's great historic pools. It's got a fantastic setting as well, atop Abbey Craig, and the immediately recognisable structure delivers panoramic views over Stirling and north towards the beautiful Ochil Hills. It's a steep 246 step ascent, but the views from the summit are worth every bit of it. So having said all that, it's pretty clear that Outlaw King has some big shoes to fill, but from what we've heard, it seems they are up to the task. Just mind that Scottish accent, Chris Pine, we're watching you.
Thanks very much for watching our second ever Scotlanders video. We are experimenting and refining and hope to just get better and better as time goes on. If you have enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe. And let us know in the comments if you think they've hit the nail on the head with their casting choices and who would be your dream pick for Robert Bruce if you were in charge of the casting call.